Father Lanahan dropped a bombshell of a sermon when I was 12 years old in 1960. He gripped the sides of the podium, his face reddening. The women, their pale faces framed by the floral headscarves that were popular in that day, clenched their jaws in anticipation. The men cleared their throats nervously. St. Lucy's was a Catholic parish on the west side of Chicago in the Austin neighborhood. It was predominantly Irish. My neighbors were policemen, firemen, and laborers. My father and both of my grandfathers were Chicago policemen, soon to be followed by my brother. Father Crosby directed his gaze at the statue of Mary. We need to venerate Mary so that she can intercede for our behalf with our Lord Jesus Christ. What happens when we take Mary out of our lives? Look at her colors, white and blue. Look at our flag. If we take Mary out of our lives, it's like taking the white and blue out of our flag. And what did we have left? A red flag, possibly with a hammer and a sickle. I didn't see that coming. I'd had plenty of times to reflect on the evil of communism while we ducked and covered under our desks at school. My mother told me that the number one site for Russia to bomb was the west side of Chicago because of all the factories. Brock's Candy Factory was at the corner of Lake and Cicero. What further evidence did I need about the evils and godlessness of communism? I daydreamed about how I could save my country. And over the next 6-7 years, I listened to discern how I could best do this. The nuns said that no greater love has a person than to lay down their life for another. When I turned 16, I got my first job, and like many employers, had to sign a loyalty oath declaring that I had never been a member or a sympathizer of the Communist Party, so that I could work as an usher and show people to their seats at baseball games and wrestling matches. When I was 17, we were required to read J. Edgar Hoover's Masters of Deceit. I especially remember the section where he talked about manipulating people that were lonely and isolated into forming communist cells that would undermine our way of life. When I was 18, I registered for the Selective Service, so I began to pay more attention to the Vietnam War. I was troubled by the images that I saw on TV about the civilians that were dying to keep those dominoes from tumbling across the Pacific. In response to the burgeoning anti-war movement, Cardinal Spellman of New York said, "My country, right or wrong." When I was 19, it was common knowledge that the commies were behind all this anti-war protest planned for the Democratic Convention in Chicago. One of my neighbors worked for the Red Squad, which was a police spy unit that would spy on these groups. This was my opportunity to serve. My neighbor was only too happy to have me and a bunch of other kids in our neighborhood join the Red Squad. I was given a number and would go to meetings by the Students for a Democratic Society, the Socialist Workers' Party, even the Black Panthers Party. I would write down names and topics that were discussed. I later discovered most of the names I wrote down were other Red Squad members. But the more meetings I went to, the more I began to doubt the wisdom of our country's participation in the Vietnam War. So when it actually came time for the convention, I was curious, and I went downtown not as a member of the Red Squad, but because I wanted to see what was happening. My sister and I went down, and we were in front of the Conrad Hilton Hotel the night that Hubert Humphrey was nominated. The demonstrators had taken over Michigan Avenue from curb to curb, and people were in a festive atmosphere chanting "Dump the Hump," when suddenly about a dozen school buses came charging down the median of Michigan Avenue, filled with policemen in full riot gear. They came charging out of the buses and split the crowd into Grant Park and downtown. The people that got chased to Grant Park got it really bad. I will never forget the sound of a baton hitting a person's head. It was like the dull thump of hitting an overripe melon. I saw a man dressed in clerical garb sitting down on the sidewalk, blood pouring from his forehead as if you turned on a spigot. Fortunately, Kathy and I were chased into the loop, and we nervously looked around for a place of refuge. And what did we find? 17. A soda fountain where the waitresses were still taking orders. We went inside, and I recognized some classmates, and as we slid into a booth just a few blocks away, people were being arrested and maced and beaten. And over the comfort of a chocolate milkshake, I recognized that something was shifting in me. Was I on the wrong side with the Red Squad? What had the demonstrators done to deserve such treatment? And what about my father and my grandfathers and my neighbors and the behavior that I witnessed that evening? Well, in case you're wondering, I didn't join the Weather Underground and bomb federal buildings. I didn't rebel against my father or the other members of my family that were on the police department. But I did quit the Red Squad, and my neighbor was not happy about it, but I was firm. 50 years later, the communists did not bomb the Austin neighborhood. Republicans in Congress are fighting tooth and nail to obstruct an investigation into a president that's acted lockstep in the interests of Russian oligarchs. And I still love my country by showing up for demonstrations, registering people to vote, and canvassing for candidates that support the American experiment.